Parole hearings, there's a significant difference in the process between parole and pardon. Pardon starts with a process, and that process has been tinkered with over the last 25 years significantly. About 25 years ago, you could apply for, if you were sentenced to life, you could apply for a pardon at any time during the course of your incarceration. If you were denied, you had to wait 1 year. That started to change as really as this tough on crime, you know, and I hate to say it because it's such an overused cliche, but the lock them up, throw away the key cliche. To apply for a pardon today, there's about a 8-page application that asks, you know, very thorough questions about your crime, about your rehabilitation, about your history, your criminal history. Once that is done, and it has to go along with a copy of the disciplinary record of in prison and all the letters of recommendation. This is a little bit of a change from just a few years ago, where the letters of recommendation went in only after if they were granted a hearing or not. But all this goes now up front, and the board then, first thing they do is they check this application for its accuracy, and if it's not properly filled out, they'll send it back. So a month later, the applicant might get the form back saying you didn't fill out this, or this is, you know, you filled this out incorrectly. So they'll get it back and they have to go through that process again. But once the board gets it, then they if it's properly filled out, they will set a administrative hearing to determine whether they are going to grant this inmate a hearing. That could take 2 to 3 months before that process happens. If they deny the person a hearing, he is denied, and now the law says he must wait 5 years before reapplying for clemency. Now there are different types. When you say clemency and pardon, technically people interchange, they interchange those words, but technically they're different. A pardon is a complete absolution of the crime, and that just doesn't happen. It is basically a board decision to recommend it, and a governor's decision to say, I absolve you. And even in cases of actual innocence, that's very hard to do. It just doesn't happen. So clemency is a reduction of the sentence. Clemency could take a life sentence and say, change that life sentence, the recommendations, to time served. So whatever time you've served, if the board recommends it, if the governor signs it, then that is the new sentence, and then of course you can determine it means somebody gets released. Or it could be, as they have a tendency to do now, 99 years with parole eligibility. The sentence changes from life to 99 years with immediate parole eligibility, or parole eligibility after 30, or something of that nature. And that is the common recommendation now. Of course, that then has to go to the governor. Over the course of 8 years of Governor Jindal, three clemencies were signed for people serving life sentences. One for a drug lifer, a woman in St. Gabriel, in the women's prison, who was serving a life sentence as a drug life, as a mule, essentially, and 2 for people convicted of homicide. The last one, on the day before he left office, was his butler, his personal butler, who for 8 years worked for him and helped raise his children. And I'm going to only say this anecdotally because I cannot prove it. The people that I know who work there at the mansion said that his wife shamed him into doing it. He wouldn't have done it had he not, because he was running for president, and he probably wouldn't have signed that one had his wife not shamed him into doing it. So you can see how rare clemency is. Previously, Governor Blanco signed about a dozen, and prior to that, Mike Foster signed less than that. So that when I say that study and why the sample was only around 200, you know how difficult it is to get clemency. So even once you get a recommendation If you do not get a governor's signature, it means nothing. It means you had a good day and you got a recommendation. Last year, there was a bill that said, okay, so you had to wait 15 years from the time of your sentencing to actually apply if you were serving a life sentence.
Okay.
So last year there was a bill that changed that 15 years from the time of sentencing to the time of arrest. Because there's a number of people who could take 4 or 5 or 6 years from the time they were arrested to the time they actually go to trial and are sentenced.
Wow.
So that was changed. So what happened, both of those elements were in the bill to change it, the waiting period also from 5 years to 3 years. 5 years actually, if a governor serves one term, you don't even get a chance to have that particular governor review your recommendation. That, again, this has been a change since the early 90s when you could reapply in a year, and then they changed it and they said 15, 7, 5, 3, and 2. I mean, they created this huge thing in the early 90s. They modified that to 15, 7, and 5. They modified that again a couple of years later to 15 and 5. And that's the way it stands right now, 15 and 5. So they've tinkered with it a lot. So that is the process of applying for pardon or clemency. It is, and again, they say it's like winning the lottery because it's so stringent, because the process takes, just to get from the time you apply, if you're granted a hearing, to get your hearing could take 12 to 15 months just to get the hearing. And then it could sit on the governor's desk for a year, 2 years, 3 years, or longer, depending if he ever takes action on it. It could sit on the governor's desk. So when I say it's like winning the lottery, it's, you know, and when you hear prosecutors or the District Attorneys Association say, well, lifers already have a process. Process is clemency. Okay, is that meaningful? Is that a meaningful process? That's the issue. If they have eligibility,
right,
and which a certain group now does have eligibility. But first, there's criteria just to be able to apply. You have to meet certain criteria. You have to have, if you're a juvenile, you were convicted and sentenced to life as a juvenile, you have to have a GED. Second, they have to have a low-risk designation on their Lorna score, which will become Tiger in the next probably 6 months to a year. If they cannot get a GED, then they have to have a waiver from the education department saying that they are incapable of getting a GED, and at least if they have to have some sort of vocational certification. This is just to be eligible to get a hearing. They have to have a good conduct record. They cannot have any they call Class B disciplinary offenses in a 12-month period prior to their applying. So, and I tell you, that might get them a hearing, but and I attend a lot of parole hearings, if they have a disciplinary record where they have kind of, well, in 2013 I got a disciplinary report, and in 2015 I got one, and in 2016 I got one, they're going to get skewered on that by the board. Why have you been in prison for 20, 25 years and you're still getting write-ups? And I saw someone just get denied for that who was a 40-year lifer. So they will use that. So I mean, it's, when I say a clean disciplinary record, we're talking, if you're gonna actually make parole, it better be 5 years or better, clean, completely clean. So it's pretty tough. It's stringent. So they have to meet those requirements just to get the hearing. If they don't meet their custody, if they're, for example, if they're, most people, and I don't know how many, actually I don't know what you think. People think that most people in prison are in cells, just all locked in cells. 80% of the people at Angola live in dormitories, go to work every day, have jobs. They're not in cells. Are used for disciplinary issues at Angola. So they have a limited number of cell space, the capacity. So if you're in a cell, meaning you're considered maximum security, and you're eligible for parole, you're automatically disqualified. So I mean, it's stringent just to get there. Because the people who do get let out, because these crimes are so serious and because the process is so stringent, that it's kind of like a big funnel. You know, it's like a big hopper. And you got, you know, thousands in at the top, and it starts shaking down, and people get, you know, the filter gets a little finer. So when you get to the bottom, the people that are actually getting out, who have committed these serious crimes, are the people who have done the work. You know, who have done the work. And that's why, when I say the recidivism rate is so low on that class of people, because the process actually works. And so people think all these violent repeat offenders are going to get out. No, that's not the way it works. And I'm going to say that, again, people say, well, they're going to make parole. Not necessarily. They're going to make parole if they're dangerous, if their record in prison shows that they are criminologically a career violent criminal. You know, they're not going to be released. I mean, these things will work against them, and I'm pretty confident that, especially with the board, and as difficult as it is, that someone who would have reason to be afraid would need to be afraid that they release someone who would then go back and reharm the victim. Now, that being said, is anything perfect? We don't live in a perfect world. You don't know what your next door neighbor is going to do tomorrow. But do you take good policy? Do you kind of flip it as an upside down pyramid, the entire system, you know, on its point, because of one which is only human, and I'll tell you the political answer is, well, how do I face that one victim? That's the political answer. With well, how do I tell them that it's not perfect? Because life isn't perfect. Because if we made if for every politician who's messed up, should they never ever run for office again? You know, for every, well, I mean, you can go for every police officer who's made a mistake, should he never be a police officer again? In some cases, that may be true. Same thing why some people should never get out of prison. You know, they've shown that they're not rehabilitatable. But that's like I said, I think that's that 20%. So I'm not going to sit there and say we don't need prisons, because we do. Public safety, we owe, you know, to everyone public safety, you know, in the sense that no one should have to be afraid. But the way we do it, the way we have done it, the way we created this system is wasteful. It's counterproductive to public safety. And in my opinion, it's immoral, and it's destructive.